I would like to begin by assuring you that I am not a holy man. So you don't have to listen to me with a great deal of reverence. I don't sell Sri Aurobindo. I am not a member of any ashram. I don't propagate him in the usual sense. And I am not going to appeal to you, to your sense of Indianism, that you are all Indians and therefore you should know Sri Aurobindo. For me, the only reason we should know what Sri Aurobindo was all about is that we are all human beings. And whether we like it or not, as Western science has again and again demonstrated to us, that we are all evolutionary beings. The entire universe, entire nature is in the process of evolution. And normally when you say evolution, we point to the tree and the birds and the fish and the animals. We forget ourselves. We ourselves are the carriers of evolution. We just didn't drop from the sky. We were here, produced by nature. And so it is as evolutionary beings, as human beings, I think that we should look at Sri Aurobindo. Of course, he was born in India. He spent a lifetime in India. As you can see from his long beard and the way he dressed and so on, you can see he's Indian. But that's not, in my judgment, the reason why people like you here staying in England, who have been here for several years, should approach Sri Aurobindo. Because right now India is in a bad mess. And it is going to continue to be in a bad mess for another 30, 40 years, I have no doubt about it. If you are Indians, I would also explain to you, we are in a bad mess simply because we just ignored what Sri Aurobindo has said was good for us. But that's not what I am going to deal with. So the first point I would like to make is, here is somebody who is addressing human beings all over the world because he perceived about 80, 90 years ago, and said it in so many words, that man is caught up in an evolutionary crisis. And a time has come for us to transcend the limitations imposed on us by what is called the mental consciousness. Now, this is a central context. You see, Mahatma Gandhi was talking to India and to the world in the context of India's freedom struggle. Vivekananda was talking in the context of the challenge Hinduism was facing from the West, particularly from Christianity. Now, Sri Aurobindo is not talking from any one of these contexts. His context is man in the evolutionary context. So in one sense, therefore, Sri Aurobindo belongs as much to India as to any other part of the world, because human being is in this crisis everywhere. And so that's the first thing I would like to establish, that I am not going to exploit his Indianism. I am not going to appeal to your sense of patriotism, your sense of, some nostalgic thing. Many Indians feel when they are out of India that, India is a great country. Of course, India is a great country, there is no doubt about it. But it's great potentially. We have not yet realized even 5% of our potential. Now, something about myself. Now, Dhirubhai asked me, what should I say about you? I said, you tell them I weigh around 175 pounds. That's all that you need to say. Because that really doesn't matter, whether I was a professor at Singapore or somewhere else, what I studied. I'm not a philosopher, I can tell you that. I taught what is called linguistics. for several years in India and in Singapore. But I turned to Sri Aurobindo because I am a sensitive Indian. I look around, I have experienced life in the East, I have experienced life in the West, and I know what the East has to offer and the West has to offer. I am not particularly enamored of things like moksha and nirvana and so on. What appeals to me most is Sri Aurobindo's insistence that we are here on earth to make life here as perfect as it can be made. The West is trying out an experiment of making life as perfect as it can, and I am very impressed by what I have seen here. In the Indian tradition, they also went in another direction. From another perspective, they wanted to bring perfection to life. But so far, I don't think we have found the real key to bring perfection to an individual's life and to the life of the collectivity. We have rare moments when we probably feel we are happy. Otherwise, no matter how talented you are, how brilliant you are, how fortunate you are, life's lesson seems to be this world, as the Gita says, is anityam asukham. There is something very transient about this world, something which is very slippery about the world. When we feel we have got it in our both hands, it slips through your fingers and it's gone. So, on the one hand, with the help of what is called the Western educationists call psychology, your ego and so on, if that is the primary basis of your approaching life, you will find, as Krishna again and again says in the Gita, this life is anityam and asukham. But on the other hand, many religions, almost all religions, have a certain defeatism in their very heart. What they are saying is, perfection is there on the other side of death. Here, in this world, don't try for perfection. This world is forever going to be like the crooked tail of a dog. The wise man is he who doesn't waste his time straightening the crooked tail of a dog. He does what he can. Otherwise, he gives it up. Maybe go somewhere and do your pranayam or do whatever asanas or whatever you want to do and find the kingdom of God within. Well, I really believe that God sent us here to establish the kingdom of God in physical, concrete terms, not merely in mystical terms. And we have the secret for this, we have the key for this. And what the key for bringing out this perfection is what Sri Aurobindo has found, and he has made it available to us. So I am excited about Sri Aurobindo simply because I am in love with this world. I am no frustration in my own life. I am not running away from life. I am not seeking perfection elsewhere. I want to seek perfection here. And that is what you need to know about me. I am not somebody who is running away from life. I am not somebody who seeks perfection elsewhere, but I want perfection here, and I personally believe that perfection is possible. Now, the next thing I would like to say very briefly in an introductory fashion is about Savitri. Savitri is not a book. You can't just take it up like a book and give a couple of lectures, introductory lectures, and then you can say Savitri's story, Savitri's symbolism, Savitri's characterization, Savitri's poetry. One can do this. But that's not the purpose of my giving talks. I don't go all over the world giving talks about this. It's not because Savitri is really great literature. Great literature there is. You have great Shakespeare, you have great Shelley, you have Wordsworth, you have Keats, you have Goethe, you have all world literature, you have great poets. But Savitri is not just great literature. It's a literature of a different kind. And if you happen to open yourself to Savitri, your perspective on life, your perspective on yourself, your perspective on everything changes. And so, what I would like to do during these 15 days is to talk about Savitri, talk around Savitri, so that by the time I'm ready to say goodbye, you have some idea what the book is about, what the book can do for you, and then if you are really sincerely touched by it, you can yourself starting engaging your consciousness with Savitri. Savitri is a consciousness with which you have to learn to engage yourself. You do not need a teacher, you do not need a guide. The guide and teacher is Savitri itself, the book itself. Now, before I really begin to talk about Savitri, my friends have said I should say something about Sri Aurobindo, his life, his relevance, and so on. As many of you know, Sri Aurobindo was born in 1872 to parents who had great disgust about everything Indian. His father was a medical doctor, settled in what is now called Bangladesh, and he was a very well-known, reputed doctor. And his one ambition in life is to bring up all his children without letting the shadow of India and its decadence and its superstitions fall on them. So when they were very young, and Sri Aurobindo was very young, 7 years old, he sent them to England with strict instructions that they should be kept as far away as possible from anything Indian. They came here. 3 brothers went to boarding school, first stayed for some years in the house of a distant friend of Sri Aurobindo's father. The father was a very generous man. He used to earn a lot of money, but give it to all deserving causes. So very often he forgot that he has 3 sons in England, and they needed money to live in England. So very often Sri Aurobindo writes, on winter nights all that they had for supper was a cup of tea and maybe a slice of bread. This is the way they lived here for many years. But Sri Aurobindo studied English literature, as you know, Greek, Latin, and as a student he won whatever prizes there were to win in all these languages, and all writing poetry in all these languages. Finally, he won a scholarship to go to Cambridge. In those days, as you know, the most successful Indian was he who was closest to the British, and the closest to the British was ICS, Indian Civil Service. So you become Paka Brown Sahib. And Sri Aurobindo's parent, father, persuaded him to write this examination. He said, why not? And he wrote this examination. Came out with flying colors. Now, after you had passed your examination, you were on a probation. That was the time when you are supposed to do some studies related to the country in which you are going to be sent. So Aurobindo was going to be sent to India. So he started reading about Indian history. He started reading about India for the first time, second hand, mainly through English. That's what he started doing. Now, in the meanwhile, the Irish freedom struggle was hotting up, and he somehow felt that he should not be an instrument of the imperial oppression of India. He should not be a part of the ICS. You know the problem, you can pass an examination, but you can't unpass one. The passing examination is easy. How can you unpass an examination? He has passed the examination. He was among the first 10 or 12 candidates in the ICS. Now how do you unpass it? Well, where there is a will, there is a way, I suppose. In those days, as a district collector, you had vast areas to survey and cover and no cars. So an ICS officer, in theory, before he went to India, was supposed to give evidence that he was a good rider of horses. Horse riding test was compulsory. Now Sri Aurobindo decided that this is one thing I have to fulfill before I can get a Pakka certificate. And he said, I will not take this writing test. And so on the day when he was supposed to appear for this writing test, he was found in some library doing something. And naturally his name didn't come out in the final list because he had not cleared this examination. The father of the Indian National Congress by that time had retired in India and had come to England, and he had kept a close watch on Sri Aurobindo because in those days he was regarded as a very brilliant student. He wrote to the ICS board, please don't make this stupid mistake, this is a very brilliant student, give him another chance. It's no mistake of it that he was not able to take the writing test. Again a second chance was given to him. But Sri Aurobindo had decided he was not going to join the ICS. Again he didn't appear. Not only that, he passed the Tripos, Cambridge Tripos examination. But as you know, you have to fulfill the residential requirements before you get the degree. He said, I have got my education, I don't want the degree. So he didn't even wait and get his degree. He was in a hurry to get back to India. And the Maharaja of Baroda used to be here in those days, and he made inquiries. I am looking for bright young Indians for state service in Baroda. And many people recommended, here is young Sri Aurobindo, why don't you go and meet him? So he met him, he was very pleased. So he gave him a job in Baroda service, and that is how, after spending several years here, at the age of 21, having passed the ICS but refused the ICS, having passed all the examination for the Cambridge Tripos but failing to fulfill the residential requirement, Sri Aurobindo went back with nothing in his hand, no degree, nothing at all, except that he had acquired an education. Now, at this stage, one flaming aspiration of Sri Aurobindo was, I must help the country to attain freedom. He just couldn't understand how a few thousand British Tommies stationed in India, maybe 15, 20, 25,000, and we were crores, how a few thousand people are controlling crores and crores of Indians. He didn't realize at that time how lethargic Indians are. So he thought Indians, like anyone else, if they really made up their mind, they could throw these British soldiers in the Arabian Sea or the Bay of Bengal. If 10 Indians, each soldier could just lift them and throw them. That was his idea. So when he went back to India, the first thought he had in mind is, I should organize a freedom movement in India. If need be, a guerrilla war could be waged. Notice in those days, in 1893, there were no aeroplanes from which you could throw a bomb. All that you had were guns and bayonets, that's all. We didn't even have them, but the French government was ready, the Germans were ready, they were beaten by the British. So they were waiting for an opportunity. If only Indians had gone to them and said, give us a few thousand guns, few thousand bayonets, they would have easily given them to us. And if only we had organized them, the freedom which came in a truncated form in 1947 probably could have got by 1907. And so when Sri Aurobindo went back to Baroda service, he didn't know one word of any Indian language. Bengali also was very faulty. He had a class fellow here called Deshpande. He was running a magazine and he asked Sri Aurobindo to write articles for that magazine. Young Aurobindo, 21-year-old, flaming idealism, could write English so brilliantly. And when he started writing, all the Indian leaders at that time said, you can't write like this against the British. British, they're the greatest people in the world. You should respect them. We somehow felt this is the Mai Baap Sarkar. Even today, many Indians suggested the great mistake we made was send back the British. They should have been there. Probably our railways would have run on time, and hospital service would have been better, and all this corruption that we now specialize in would not have come in. Many people say that, but in those days, most Indians believed the greatest blessing after Lord Krishna's birth in India was the occupation of India by the British. That was the attitude. Now, what do you do with a fallen people who are not even aware of the fact that freedom is a most precious thing? And so when he started writing these articles, please tone down, don't write in such virulent terms. Write softly. He said, if you want me to write tame articles, I won't write articles. Just forget about it. Then he realized that what is called the Teja, the Kshatra Teja, the warrior spirit of the Indian people, completely lacking. And so you can't give freedom to a people, help people to get freedom, if they have not deserved it from within. So first of all, he said, I must educate the Indian masses. So slowly, quietly, he started working towards this. There are many All India journals like Yugantar and Vande Mataram in which he wrote these articles. Many of the problems that are troubling India now were troubling even India even in those days. His analysis in those days, even today, is very, very valid. A couple of years ago, I wrote a little pamphlet, a book came out, the title of which is The Problem of Hindu-Muslim Unity in Sri Aurobindo's Light. Sri Aurobindo wrote about this in the first decade of the 19th century. And some of the thoughts he expressed in those days are so valuable even today. If it only followed his advice, I don't think this problem would not even occur. He also talked in those days about democracy, about socialism. He said, many of you will be surprised to hear this, he said, socialism is to capitalism what civilization is to barbarism. Socialism is to capitalism what civilization is to barbarism. But he said, the way in which the West is trying to implement socialist ideals will not suit the Indian conditions. Similarly, he said, we don't have to learn democracy from the West. We had the democratic ideal right from the Gram Panchayat in the early days. The British destroyed them systematically. Probably you don't know this, in the 18th century, when the British first came to India, the percentage of literacy in India was higher than the percentage of literacy in England. What the British first did, their native organization was completely destroyed. And similarly, he said, democracy is a great ideal, but I don't think we can implement it in the way either the British have or the Americans have, because Americans and British have a long history. The people have been trained in this. They know how to handle this. We don't know it, and therefore we must evolve our own institutions. All these things he used to say in those days. The British were worried because this man was writing such articles, such language, flaming, creating this hunger in young people for freedom. Many of you probably have heard of Acharya Kripalani, who was a very close associate of Mahatma Gandhi for several years. In 1948, 15th of August, he gave a talk over All India Radio. He said, when I was a young man, the one thing we were most eagerly waiting for is the weekly edition of what is called Yugantar, because Sri Aurobindo used to write a feature article in that. And when we got that newspaper, that magazine, journal, whatever it was, from the post office, we would all stand there just outside the post office, read that article, and and then we'll go home. Just as today, in India, a journal like magazine like Stardust or Film Fair, everybody is waiting for this thing to come, and when it comes, unless you have gone through all this, you don't leave the post office. That was the spirit. And he said, if Mahatma Gandhi, when he came back from Africa, he found a certain section of the Indian intelligentsia responsive to him, that was because Sri Aurobindo had prepared this generation. In around 1906 to 1908, he wrote a series of articles called Passive Resistance. in which he said, the British, being a civilized country, you must have civilized instruments of protest. They can be shamed, the British, because of a certain level of culture they have. And all the subsequent one Mahatma Gandhi did, Satyagraha, non-cooperation, Swadeshi, all these you will find in that book. If Mahatma Gandhi came back, if he was looking for any textbook on how to wage a freedom struggle, all that he had to do was this set of articles called Passive Resistance. This was, on the one hand, the three levels of work that Sri Aurobindo did. First of all, try to organize on the guerrilla pattern an underground movement. And he found Indians didn't have that spirit. You'll be quite surprised, as you all know, North Vietnam defeated the mightiest empire the world has ever known, the mightiest military power the world has ever known. Because they were organized and they waged this guerrilla warfare. British, of course, were mighty, but America had bombs. British had nothing in 1893. He said it was possible, but it didn't become possible. So he prepared the educated young people, and Bhagat Singh and so on, who went to the gallows smiling. Bhagat Singh's story is the day he was going to the gallows, people said, he said, last night I had the soundest of sleep, I'm the happiest of man. If a country can produce a dozen people like that, who are willing to go to the gallows smilingly, that country deserves freedom. This is what Sri Aurobindo did. He, Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, a whole number of people. Somehow in India now, if you go, you get the impression freedom struggle began with Gandhi and Nehru and ended with Gandhi and Nehru. Of course, it ended with Gandhi and Nehru, but I'm not sure it began with Gandhi and Nehru. There is a whole generation of people who prepared the Indian spirit, and Sri Aurobindo belongs to that group. So on the one hand, during his 13 years in Baroda, he was very busy doing this, at the same time not attracting any attention, because this was all behind the scenes. And in 1906, in the Surat Congress, when Tilak thundered, freedom is my birthright, Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it, we shall have it, the words, the voice were Tilak's, but the inspiration and the content came from Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo never spoke up, he just used to sit quietly. And that is why British observers at that time had said, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh is the most dangerous Indian. Try to get him by hook or by crook. So finally, they got him in this Alipur bomb case. Some young students had taken lessons in chemistry and were learning how to make bombs, wild bombs they were making, and one accident, one student died, and the British surely said, Sri Aurobindo must be behind this, arrest him, put him behind bars in Alipur for 1 year. We'll come back to that later. This is on the one hand Sri Aurobindo's great work, preparing the country for Gandhi, without taking any credit for himself. And then, just as from the ICS, he was always there, took a U-turn, rejected the ICS, came out of it. Similarly, by about 1909, he was the undisputed leader of the Indian freedom struggle. But then, once again, he left everything, went to Pondicherry. 40 years he didn't come out. People kept writing to him. In 1920, a lieutenant of Tilak's wrote to him and said, we are having a special session of the All India Congress in Nagpur. We have no leaders. Please come out and you become our leader. The country is looking up to you. Of course, he wrote to them why he couldn't come out. That's a different part. But this is one part of Sri Aurobindo's life which is not very well known to people outside. As you know, when he came to India, he knew very little other than English. European culture, European civilization, European literature. He had mastered quite a few European languages, including Spanish, Italian, German, French, and so on. English, of course, he spoke and wrote like a native speaker of English. Then when he went to India, he said, the one thing I know nothing about is Indian languages, Indian literature, Indian culture. So he began a systematic study of Indian languages, Gujarati, Bengali, his own mother tongue Bengali, Sanskrit. And you will be amazed to know that in 1914, when he started a journal called the Arya, he wrote in that journal a series of articles called the Foundations of Indian Culture. I very often say in Indian public, no member of the parliament should be allowed to enter the parliament house if he has not read that book. But my saying that doesn't help, because very few members of the parliament can read. In India now, more and more of these MPs are illiterate. They can't not just read in English, they can't read in any Indian language either. But that book, even if you today read it, is a very rational exposition of the spiritual values, spiritual tradition of India. Of course, the occasion for it is a British critic who wrote a book, a pamphlet called Is India Civilized? That was the title. And his contention was India was not civilized. A British professor who was working in India wrote a rejoinder to this book. And Sri Aurobindo was reviewing this rejoinder. What began as a review of a rejoinder subsequently became a book, where you have a complete presentation of what religion is, what spirituality is, how they are different, what are our foundational values, what about Indian art, Indian culture, why is it a Greek statue is so perfect in every respect, why our Ganesha looks so different from any Greek statue. He has an elephantine face, a big ear, a big stomach. Why are Indian culture like that? If you go to Puri, the deity that you worship is so crudely made. What is it? What is the difference between Indian approach to art, Greek approach to art, European approach to art? All these things he talked about. He talked about Kalidas, Bhavabhuti, he talked about Valmiki. The point I am trying to make, somebody who was so ignorant about Indian culture, Indian literature, until 1893, within 20 years, he writes a classic on foundations of Indian culture. Even today, undoubtedly, it's a classic. There is a little story, I'll come to it a little later. When Sri Aurobindo was being tried in Alipur bomb case, he found that the judge who was trying him was his contemporary in the ICS. Both of them had written ICS examination simultaneously, same time, same year. For ICS, you have to write an exam in some Indian language, just like you take French test or a German test, very elementary, but you have to do that. And in that examination, Sri Aurobindo got higher marks than the British friend of his in English. But the British friend got higher marks than Sri Aurobindo in Bengali. So you expect the opposite, but this is exactly what happened. Well, when this was going on, as I said, he was very busy educating himself, finding about Indian culture. He says somewhere that as a probationer for ICS, when he started reading the Upanishads in English, Max Muller's translation and so on, he discovered that the word Atman, the one word that very struck him very greatly was the word Atman. He said, there is something about this word. There is some mystery about the whole concept of the Atman. One day I should sit down and study it. That's all that he had said. Did nothing more about it. He at that time was not interested in spiritual life. He at that time didn't believe in God. As you know, somebody who was educated in the 1890s in Cambridge, doesn't believe in God. So he didn't believe in God. But he had learned that yoga is a way of acquiring power. If you become a yogi, you acquire power. He said, it doesn't matter where the power comes from. I want power to use it in the freedom struggle so that the British can be driven out. So no matter what happens, I want power. So he first learned pranayam from somebody. Somebody said pranayam is a great thing. So he learned pranayam. He has written, the result of pranayam is, before I did pranayam, I used to write in a day maybe 20, 25 lines of poetry. But after the turn to pranayam, my output increased. I could write 5 times, maybe 100 lines, 150 lines of poetry in one day. But I didn't acquire any spiritual benefit out of pranayam. See, all over the world today, the word yoga has become very popular. Like chutney and sambar and idli and so on. Yoga also become very popular because by yoga you mean physical culture. You can live, look young, even in your 70s and 80s, you can, why not? I mean, it's a good idea, good ideal. But yoga is not restricted to that. It's one aspect of it. So he turned to yoga, pranayam, nothing very great happened. In the meanwhile, the British had split Bengal into 2 parts, and all Bengalis, just couldn't tolerate the very idea of Bengal being split into 2. So there was a conflagration throughout Bengal. Sri Aurobindo left his job, went to Calcutta, became the principal of what is now known as Yadavpur University. In North Calcutta there is Yadavpur University. He was the first principal. South Calcutta. It was National College in those days. Now it's called Yadavpur University. Became the first principal. And he was very busy also in journalistic activities. But while he was in Baroda itself, something very interesting happened. On one day, he found that his younger brother, Barin, had very high fever, and the fever won't leave him for 5-6 days. They tried all the doctors in Baroda. All the Maharaja's doctors were Sri Aurobindo's doctors, but the fever was virulent. And one fine morning they found a Naga sannyasi coming to the door for alms. And the servant in the house, brought some rice and about to give it to the Naga sannyasi. He said, I don't want rice from you because your face is so tense. Is anything wrong in the house? He said, yes, there is one member in our family who has been having this fever for 5-6 days. We have tried all medication, but we have not been able to find, he has not been able to find any relief. He said, is that so? Why don't you go in and bring me a glass of water? So he went in, bringing a glass of water. The sannyasi took this glass of water, did something with his hand, uttered some mantras, and said, give this to the patient to drink. So Barin drank that water. Within 3 or 4 hours, the temperature went down, and next day he was all right. Somebody has mentioned this to Sri Aurobindo. So there must be something in all these sannyasis and bhavas can't be just hoaxes. There must be, the large percentage must be hoaxes, but there is some percentage, there is some power in it. What is it? At that time, when he was in the thickest of the freedom struggle, he met this Maharashtrian saint called Lele. And Lele told him, Vishnu Bhaskar Lele told him, look, you all think that the most brilliant ideas that you have are acquisitions of your mind. They are not. The source of ideas is above the mind. And the mind can be so trained as to receive these ideas, as to have access to these ideas. Now, one thing which is essential in all yoga is implicit obedience. And Lele said, no, I won't give you a lecture, I will show this to you. So, for 3 days and 3 nights, he practiced this, what is called silencing of the mind. The mind becomes absolutely still and silent, like the surface of a waveless sea. That's what it is. And this is an experience which is very difficult. I won't name names, but there are people who have gone round the world preaching silence of the mind, but have never been able to find them themselves or give it to other people. But here was Sri Aurobindo. Lele himself was surprised. He said, I have given to this practice 20-25 years, but here you have got it in 3 days. Well, that happens. as you know, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa's case, somebody who came him, gave him the highest Vedantic Diksha, he was quite surprised because he had attained this Siddhi after so many years, but Ramakrishna got it in 3 days. Because these are not ordinary people, they are extraordinary people who have come here to do some work. Now, at that time, Sri Aurobindo was still going round from Bombay to Pune to here, there giving talks, and they had organized a lecture for him in Chowpatty, huge gathering. Your mind? Completely blank, not even a single idea, nothing at all. He got panicky. He said to Leleji, now I am supposed to speak not once, every evening I have to give talks, but there is nothing in my mind. He said, don't worry. When you go to the talks, just stand up quietly and do pranam to the audience and wait and see what happens. See, you and I, being very educated and very smart, will argue with him. How can it be if there is nothing in the brain, how can things come? He didn't do that. He said, okay. And there he went, there he stood, and then nothing was in the mind. He didn't know what to talk about. He had forgotten, looks as if the mind was a complete blank. Then he suddenly found that almost a Niagara of words coming through his mouth, Not any words, but words needed in the context. Words which are very powerful. He realized it first time around. And this ability to access thought, realms of thought, worlds of thought, from which a genius gets an occasional word sometimes, from which a scientist gets an occasional idea sometimes, a poet gets an inspiration, that can be accessed. Sri Aurobindo found that by his own experience. And later on, when he went to Pondicherry in 1914, Paul Richer, the French philosopher, was at that time married to the mother. When he came to Pondicherry, he suggested to Sri Aurobindo, let us start a journal called Arya. You write from the Indian perspective, I will write from the Western perspective. So we will present to the world a new synthesis of knowledge. In one sense, this project could not be completed because Sri Aurobindo did his part, but from the Western part that contribution is yet to come, because what happened was within 1 month after the Arya was started, the First World War began, and Paul Richer, being a French citizen, had to come back to France, and the Western contribution has not yet come. So in one sense, what they had planned was a global, total perception, new knowledge. Only the Indian side has been developed, or the Indian perception has developed. I personally feel that a time has come when Western thinkers will take the central idea of Sri Aurobindo and develop it from their point of view. Only then will it be complete. I still believe that there is a part to Sri Aurobindo's entire thinking, global, because truth is one. But as you know, within 1 month, Paul Richer had returned to France because he was needed for the war effort. And he said, I have never been a philosopher. Sri Aurobindo writes himself, I had never known any philosophy. Of course, I was a poet, I was a student of literature, I was a student of history, culture, but no philosopher. I am not a philosopher. And here was I, entrusted with the responsibility of writing 64 pages of philosophy every month. He said, I have taken it as a yogi. Yogi is one who can bend his mind energies to any work that comes to him. He has no preferences. If you are a yogi, you are a professor at Oxford, you go to the ashram and say, I am a yogi, I want to do yoga. Is that so? You expect to be sent to the university, he may send you to a carpentry shop. It's a good training for your ego, because yogi is not somebody who is a better mathematician, but he's a better, for his inner training, that may be necessary. So he said, I will do it. Please believe me, I have in my time read books, theses, I have written things, I know myself what it is. If you open any single issue of the Arya, Sri Aurobindo single-handed ran it for 7 years. Any time, any issue you take, for example, 1916, 15th of August, open that. Every article is by Sri Aurobindo. But they are not on one single book. Just imagine yourself writing chapter 6 of one book. Immediately, chapter 15 of another book. Chapter 23rd of a third book. Chapter 44 of a fifth book. Simultaneously, he was writing 6 books. And people who lived with him in those days have said, Sri Aurobindo's writing books was not his primary business. Primary business, he was a yogi. So when the telegram came, he would sit down at his typewriter. So between the morning tea and the breakfast, a short chapter on a particular book would be ready. After breakfast, he would sit at the typewriter, another chapter of the Life Divine would be ready. After lunch, before the evening tea, a chapter of future poetry would be ready. Like that, on any given day, he would write 4 chapters of 4 different books to hold them all in the mind. It's a serialized, it's not. After lunch, before the evening tea, a chapter of future poetry would be ready. Like that, on any given day, he would write 4 chapters of 4 different books to hold them all in the mind. It's a serialized, it's not sitting at one time, serialized. Month by month he was serializing. And this is the way he wrote what have now come out as 25 to 30, 26 out of his total output of 35 volumes. The total output was now complete works of Sri Aurobindo have come out in 35 volumes. 25 volumes were written in the Arya. And he said, I didn't have to do anything. The words simply came down to me. I have to organize these with my mind and let them flow through my fingers, as it were. You would just open a faucet and, hot water, cold water, very hot water, like that. So he could just this came on. And he said, I could go on for writing for another 50 years. But I thought what I had given would be enough at this stage in evolution for another couple of millennia. 2,000-3,000 years, we don't need any more than that. Now, this is what he got out of this capacity to access knowledge which is beyond mind. This is the training that Lele gave him. As he was progressing along his yogic practices, the British government those days arrested him, put him behind bars in Alipur jail in North Calcutta. Is it North Calcutta? Calcutta. Even now you will see the cell there. If you go to Alipur jail, even now they have preserved this cell. I have been there myself to see that. Now he has written an interesting book in Bengali about his prison experiences. And it's one of the most humorous books, but also, he lambasts the British notion of justice. Subsequently you had Class A prisoners, Class B prisoners, Class C prisoners. In those days there was nothing. You had a room 6 by 6. You had one tumbler that was your bath for all purposes. That was the one tumbler you had to use. That was the time when he was in the jail, solitary imprisonment for 1 year. But he said, the British really sent me to a cave of tapasya. During that 1 year, he took up very seriously what is called the yoga of the Gita. Now when you and I want to do the Gita, what do? We get all possible commentaries that are available in London and put them together. And we read commentary, this commentary, that commentary, the other commentary. We haven't even read the Sanskrit verses, we start reading commentaries. But in India, spirituality is something to be practiced. Because beyond a point, spiritual knowledge does not make any sense to us. It is a knowledge that appeals, opens itself only to a consciousness which has universalized itself to some extent, which has purified itself to some extent, But being where you are, if you merely read commentaries, 1, 2, 3, it doesn't necessarily take you anywhere. It will make you a learned man. Maybe you'll get an invitation to give talks on the Gita, but it doesn't, improve your own life. It doesn't change your perception. And here he was, doing the yoga of the Gita. And at that time, his associates have said he was so immersed in all this. He didn't even bother how this great lawyer that the Congress party had given him, C.R. Das, how he was to build a case. He said, my case is being fought by the divine. Now at the human level also, case has to be fought. You develop it as you think best. So he didn't even cooperate with it. We were totally unconcerned with any of these things. Finally, he was acquitted, but before he was acquitted, he had a great siddhi of yoga. One day, one fine morning, he looked out the window. There is a small window, the cell. And normally he used to see a policeman go up and down with a gun fixed on it, a bayonet. It was going up and down. That morning when he looked out, it was not a policeman. It was Lord Krishna walking up and down with a bayonet in his hands. By that side there was a huge tree. He looked at the tree. There was no tree. It was Lord Krishna himself, where he used to see the leaves of the tree. They were curls of Lord Krishna. He said, what's happened to me? Am I gone mad? What has happened to me? Then a little later he was taken to the dining room of the prison dining room, where there are murderers, there are cheats, there are all kinds of people. He all found each one of them Lord Krishna himself. Just imagine getting into a train, and you just sit into the train and look around, and everybody in the train is your Ishtadevata. Suddenly you find, because this is what Upanishads of the Vedas, they tell us, we are all manifestations of the same divine. But this is something you know here, but we never experienced it. He suddenly experienced it. That entire world is a manifestation of the Lord. What is called, in Baroda he had the experience of what is called Nirguna Brahman, the formless supreme. And this is the Brahman with form. And he says this experience stayed with me for several days. Very soon the case came to conclusion. The British judge acquitted him, and he came back. And now something very interesting happened. One day he got what he himself calls an inner Adesh, which said to him, go to Chandranagar. Chandranagar, as you know now, it's a suburb of Calcutta. In those days it was a French colony. You and I would have said, why should I go to Chandranagar? Where do I go to Chandranagar? Who will take care of me? Didn't ask. He had learnt implicit obedience to the inner voice. He went to Chandranagar. There most people avoided him because he had this reputation of being the most sought after by the British police. They will say they will be in trouble. But there was one Bengali disciple of his. He said, you are welcome to stay as long as you like here. He himself had a good spiritual life and so on. He stayed there for 6 weeks. And during this period, he had great spiritual experiences. We'll talk about them if necessary. Then there he got another Adesh to go to Pondicherry, and he went to Pondicherry. He went there in 1910. He always kept saying, as soon as my work is finished, I'll come back to active life. Because Sri Aurobindo's yoga didn't believe in retiring from the battle of life. Now, 1910 to 1950 is 40 years. Many people say that before he went to Pondicherry, he has already some of the highest siddhis of traditional yoga. So the question arises, what was he doing in Pondicherry for 40 years? Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but 40 long years. What was he doing? Well, about this, there is a lot of misunderstanding in India itself. A typical example of this misunderstanding you can see. You must have heard of the Maharaja, former Maharaja of Kashmir, Karan Singh, who became minister for some time, he, as a student, wrote a thesis on Sri Aurobindo's political life for his PhD. When he was writing a thesis, he was himself a vice chancellor of Kashmir University. Because Sadre Riyasat, he had inherited more or less this position. So he was the vice chancellor of Kashmir University, but he was submitting this to Agra University. Uh, it's a good thesis. It came out, and subsequently it had to be published. Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister, so he requested Pandit Nehru to write a preface. Pandit Nehru obliged. In that preface, he writes a sentence which is very revealing. He said, in the late 20s, when Mahatma Gandhi returned, after he returned from South Africa, and gave a call for all people who loved the motherland to join hands with him in this struggle, Satyagraha, jail bharo, vagera vagera, all this. We expected Sri Aurobindo to come out of Pondicherry. But the fact he didn't come out disappointed us a great deal. And that disappointment, even today, continues to haunt the Indian intelligentsia. Now the reason why I will come back to it in a minute, but in my perception, Nehru's misunderstanding has no parallel. I can't give any example of that, so very often what I do when I talk to audiences is I kind of imagine a situation. Just imagine if Eisenhower, who subsequently became the American president, and he was one of the leaders of the, in the European theater, I think war theater, he was the chief. Suppose he had written in his biography or autobiography, as you know, America joined the Second World War rather late. In the first few years it just watched. When America declared war against Germany, I expected Einstein and others to leave their laboratories and come and join the war effort as Tommies or whatever, early morning, left, right, and so on. But the fact they didn't do this disappointed me a great deal. Now, suppose he had said this, you know what happened. Because people like Einstein didn't leave the laboratories, the Allied forces could develop the atomic power, atomic bomb, nuclear explosion and so on. That's why they won the war. Similarly, it seems to me, because Sri Aurobindo didn't leave Pondicherry at that time, in one sense, in my understanding, humanity has won the war of its future. It's only a question of time when the future is going to be fully realized. Now this is a question of my faith. Now whether my faith is right or wrong, it's my business. But I will explain to you the grounds on which I am based in this. But there is another reason which you will find easy to understand. Now, when Sri Aurobindo turned to yoga, his primary ambition was to draw power from yoga so that it could be used in the freedom struggle, and India's condition, deprivation, poverty, etc., slavery, etc., could be removed. He wanted power for that. Now, once you turn to yoga, the first thing that happens to you is that your understanding of the world changes. Your understanding of the problems of the world changes. That is why in the Indian tradition, who is a wise man? In the Puranas, when Dashrath had any problem, he also had his finance ministers, he had also had his, experts, but Dashrath always went to Vasishtha. Why did he go to Vasishtha? Because Vasishtha had spiritual wisdom. That is, a spiritual man is he who has risen above the limitations of his ego. As long as you are in the ego, however universal you may be through education, through contact, through reading, there is a certain grid which we wear and through which we look at the world. And so, When four people look at the world, they see four different worlds because each one is looking at the world through the grid of the ego. And once you enter spiritual life, you do not become wise enough to lecture to people, but the world begins to look to you differently. Gradually, you transcend the limitations of your ego. And Sri Aurobindo, because of his tremendous progress he had made, realized there is nothing like a problem which is exclusive to India. There is a problem, and the whole of humanity is suffering from this problem. This problem has an American expression, has a Russian expression, has a British expression, has an Indian expression. The Indian expression, because of India's past, has manifested itself in poverty, in physical disorganization, in what Sri Aurobindo calls the rejection of matter. In the West, because of their tremendous organizational capacity, the great respect they have shown to matter, their external life is very rich, but probably the life in terms of human relationships, the life in terms of the inner relationships, etc., is not as rich. They have problems there. And so wherever you go, it is wrong to think that there are Indian problems. The problem is the problem of man. The problem is the problem of human consciousness. So you cannot therefore seek exclusively solutions for Indian problems without at the same time trying to find a solution to the human problem. Now what is the human problem? The human problem, as we all know, in spite of all that we have, right now as we all know, we know well enough, the world was never as rich as it is today. I came here at 3 o'clock. I tried to talk to my daughter in Bombay, didn't succeed. I talked to my wife in Hyderabad, which Akbar even could imagine. I'm not joking. You see, we have, thanks to science, thanks to man's understanding of the physical forces, we have made such tremendous progress. I didn't invent the telephone, I didn't discover it, I'm just using it. Science has made available this kind of power to me. And so this is a tremendous advance that we have made. And so, if wherever the discovery was made, whether it is in America or England, there is nothing like Christian science. Science is available to man. So Sri Aurobindo said, human problems have to have an answer which satisfies all its manifestations. What is the problem? How do we solve the problem? As you know, as I said, in spite of the fact we are so powerful, it's a matter of shame that the United Nations should pass resolutions year after year. 40% of the world's children die of malnutrition, lack of elementary health care. Why? Because there isn't enough money. Isn't true? Is it true that there isn't enough money? Look at the defense budgets of all these countries. We swear we don't want to fight a war. Look at India and Pakistan. India says we don't never want to fight a war with Pakistan, but such large outlays, I am not blaming them. This is the trap in which we are caught. Reagan kept saying, oh, America, Russia is getting so powerful, Star Wars. Now you know how powerful Russia was. You see, I always thought when I was in Los Angeles as a student, oh, American, everybody has the whole world in his drawing room coming through TV. India, we are also backward. I thought Americans would be very enlightened. But Americans are as chauvinistic as an Indian Patel in his village. Nothing changes. So we have all this knowledge, and United Nations will next year pass a resolution and say, we tried our very best, we have a new report which says from 40% we have come to 39.75%. Why? Because funds were not available. Is it really true? But I am not blaming an individual. This is the human condition. Now, can I go and say to the Defense Minister of India, don't worry, don't spend any money and military power, Pakistan, won't do anything to you. Can I say that? I can't say that. Now, this is the trap in which we are all caught. I am only giving one example of this. Technology. Technology is a wonderful thing. Green revolution, tomatoes which were like this have now become like this. You must have read in the Time magazine a few months ago a report which said the toxins which have gone into the human body have reached such a level that some unconfirmed research suggests in some European countries male fertility rate might drop. Wherever you look at it, we have made a whole mess of the whole thing. If our great-grandchildren were to look back on us, they will say, our grandparents were such great people, they built so much in this world, they brought so much prosperity, but they just couldn't take care of themselves. This is what they are going to say. Now we are India, we are just following England, America very blindly. We have destroyed all our forests, our rivers are polluted. At least in the West there is an awakening now. They want to make sure that, that rivers are kept pure, but even that is gone. Everywhere, therefore, there is a situation where human greed, human cupidity doesn't change. There is a book which gives you a debate between the Japanese philosopher Ikeda and Toynbee. They have a very learned debate. At the end of it, they come to the conclusion, which you and I already have come to the conclusion. What is it? If things have to change, man has to change. Everybody accepts this. If you really ask what does man have to change means, generally we say you have to change, not me. You have to change, other people have to change. Okay, man has to change. What is the change? How you bring about this change? Let me tell you, I haven't seen anywhere a program and agenda for changing man. Nowhere. Toynbee says, Ikeda says we must have a world dictatorship. Look at that. Toynbee says we must have a world religion. If man has to change, you must have a world religion. How much religion has helped us to change? Religion at one time helped us to become from tribal man to civilized man. But now, as the British philosopher said, we have enough religion to hate and kill one another, but not enough to love one another. That's what religion has become. Anything that comes to man, when we were doing our SSA, I don't know whether you know what SSA examination is, matriculation examination in India. There are some set essays we all used to learn by heart, expecting that we will. One of the essays was science, a boon or a curse. Religion, a boon or a curse. Technology, a boon or a curse. Anything that comes to man can convert it into a curse. This has been our history. As a result, some very wise thinking Westerners, like Kessler, Kessler in his last book that he wrote, Janus, he says man has no future. Man is a paranoid creature. He describes man as a paranoid creature. Man is the only species capable of destroying other members of the species in wars. Other species, monkeys fight, but when two groups of monkeys come and a certain land is disputed, then what happens? They don't fight until death. The leader of each group comes forward and the leaders fight. Very often they fight long enough to judge that leader of A group is stronger than the leader of group, and the A group stays and the B withdraws. We won't do that. If I can't kill A group, I will take help from C group and then come back. This kind of thing. And considering all this, he said, man is a paranoid, he compares human plight. He says, human beings, as today, imagine a room, he says. A room in which you have stored inflammables, petrol, kerosene, all kinds of combustible material. And the room is closed, you can't open it. And in the room, there are a dozen kids. and there are some boxes of matches. What you and I can do is, there are windows, we stand outside windows and say, please be moral, don't play with the matches. Playing with matches is not safe. So you speak in Bengali, I speak in Kannada, somebody speaks in Gujarati, we all are addressing, lecturing to these young people, hoping they won't do. But children are children. One of these days they are going to take up one box of matches and just strike it and the whole damn thing is going to blow up. And he said, therefore man has to be written off. This is not a conclusion of any Indian philosopher. This is a conclusion of an observer of the human situation as sophisticated as Arthur Kessler. Now, this is the situation. This is the problem. If there is money, man can make that a noose around his neck. Anything man can do to destroy himself, to harm himself. This is the human potential. What do we do? Religion, as I said, tells us this world is a hopeless game. Don't try to change it. Go to Rishikesh, Hardwar or somewhere. Join an ashram, take a rosary, count morning, evening, do pranayam, take cold Gangajal. Gangajal is not anymore clean either. It's also become dirty. So where do we go from here? This is the human situation that Sri Aurobindo was worried about. Is there a solution to it? Where is it? How is the solution to be achieved? What has to be done? Now, who will understand this? Because these are not matters for which you can produce a tangible result. Now, my contention is, one of the great attractions of Savitri is Sri Aurobindo takes up this problem and discusses the ramifications of this problem, making use of the good old Savitri Satyavan story as a framework. He is not interested in telling a story which is already told several times. Savitri's story is primarily, it comes in the Vedas. Then it comes in Mahabharata. You see, in Mahabharata, when the Pandavas have lost everything and have gone to the forest, all these rishis and saints come visit the Pandavas because they are in great hardship. One day, Rishi Markandeya comes there, and Yudhishthir asks Markandeya, look at Draupadi, the humiliation she had to face in the courts of the Kauravas, the suffering that she has to go through. Is there any evidence in history, human history, of another woman who has undergone all this suffering? That's the question Yudhishthir asks. And in reply to that, Markandeya tells her the story of Savitri. Now, the story of Savitri, when it comes to Puran, and Purans, very often take a highest truth and bring them at the cinema level. It's like, the Vedic inspiration, Vedic idealism is very often brought down. As a result, many more people understand it, but there is a dilution. The whole story of Ahalya, for example. Ahalya became a stone. The reason why she became a stone. And Rama's contact once again revived her. The Vedic ideal, it simply means Rajas. If it has to rise higher, it has to come into contact with Sattva. Otherwise it will become Tamas. That's the story in the Vedas. That is the implication. But when it comes to Puranas, she desired Indra, Indra desired her, and all kinds of things. And, similarly, Savitri's story is a great myth in the Indian tradition. The myth that is symbolized in Mrityormam Amritam Gamay. Man's perennial quest for immortality. Science is also doing the same thing. Science is also looking for this elixir of life, which will make human life at least as 150 years, 180 years. I don't think anything wrong in it. This was the Vedic ideal. This, when it comes to Puranas, you know what it becomes? It becomes a symbol of wife's conjugal fidelity to her husband. In these days of women's lib, Savitri's story is a story of male chauvinism. So many of my friends ask me, Sri Aurobindo was writing in the 20th century. Instead of writing, about Savitri, whose devotion to her husband is all extolled so that all other wives to come follow her example. You and I have no example to follow. We follow our own way. Why could he not for once reverse the roles and write the story of a husband who is faithful to his wife and conjugal devotion? And this is not about conjugal devotion at all. This is about, as I said, man in the evolutionary journey has got stuck somewhere. How to go beyond it, how to find a solution to this problem. This is what Sri Aurobindo was looking for. This is what took him 40 years in Pondicherry. And one of the byproducts of his quest is Savitri. He calls it a legend and a symbol. The legend is well known, but what use he puts this legend, what symbolic significance he packs it with, is something extraordinary. This original story is narrated in the Mahabharata in about 600 lines. 600 lines. Sri Aurobindo narrates it in 24,000 lines. The last thing I would like to mention, I told you last time, a little while ago, that Sri Aurobindo wrote books like The Life Divine, Synthesis of Yoga, On the Way, The Human Cycle, Ideal of Human Unity, Future Poetry, all these different diverse books during a period of 6 years. Savitri, it took 50 years. 50 years it took. And somebody asked, why did you have to take 50 years? He said, as I was rising in my consciousness through yoga, when I found I had made a definite advance to a higher state, I rewrote the whole of it from that level of consciousness. So it was not simply adding, subtracting, making it more beautiful as a poetry. It was not that at all. I was trying to see to what extent the English language can be a medium for me to express my yogic consciousness. So people like me, who believe in Sri Aurobindo and who believe in what he has written, believe that this is a verbal embodiment of Sri Aurobindo's own consciousness. And since it is that, it doesn't open itself immediately. You have to cultivate yourself to it. The Gayatri mantra, people have said, some people have got the highest spiritual realization through Gayatri. Now if you take Gayatri, try to understand its meaning, you wonder what it is in that Gayatri. And yet, it is a fact that in our tradition, people have reached great siddhis through the cultivation of Gayatri. So, a mantra has to be cultivated with your consciousness. And that is why I regard this as the easiest way of approaching Sri Aurobindo's own consciousness. Now, for many years, people believed Savitri is a great book. So what did they do? After buying Savitri, they also bought a piece of silken cloth, tied it with it nicely, put it in the puja room, put flowers on it. Now there are renegades like me, who have started saying Savitri exists because it has to be engaged with our consciousness. And the more number of people do it, the better is it. There is no authorized version of Savitri, meaning, as I said, I am not even a product of the ashram. I was never educated in the ashram. So what I say is not a sanctioned, authorized interpretation. I simply regard this as the greatest book ever written. And I think my role is no more or no less than that of a town crier. Wherever people like you gather, I hold this book in my hand and say, here, here, I have found the greatest book in my life. Would you like to look at it? There is no guarantee everybody will open to Savitri. In spiritual life, each person has a different destiny. But this kind of a book is around. Why should I spend my time talking about other things? Because I have found the greatest Veda of the 20th century or the next millennium. And so, during the next 13, 14 days, I have no set program. I have no set syllabus. I have no set ideas. Just now I told Vijan Bhai that I will look at the audience. They have a certain curiosity. And if I keep myself open to that, something from you comes to me and formulates my ideas and leads me on. And that's what I propose to do in the next 14 days. I don't promise that I will complete it, that's not the idea. But I will try to reach as far as I can into your being so that you see the power, the joy, the delight Savitri has been to me and it can be to anyone else. So I think we should stop here. It's almost 1 minute to 9. Thank you very much.